A place typically calm and serene, transformed into the site of a horrendous crime. On a cold November evening in 1969, Betsy Aardsma, a promising 22-year-old graduate student at Penn State, walked into the Pattee library to study. She would never walk out alive. A single stab wound, delivered with precision, took her life in an instant. No scream, no struggle, just a library filled with students too absorbed in their own books to notice the horror unfolding between the stacks. Was it a random act of violence, or was Betsy targeted? Over half a century later, the mystery of her death continues to haunt those who dare to ask the question, who killed Betsy Aardsma? Welcome to Crimes That Haunt Us, the channel where we dive deep into the most chilling and mysterious cold cases. If you are hooked, hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments to help us grow. Born on July 11, 1947 in the quiet town of Holland, Michigan, Betsy Aardsma grew up in a devoutly religious family. Her parents, Richard and Ethel Aardsma, welcomed her as the second of their 4 children. Richard worked as a sales tax auditor for the state of Michigan, while Ethel was a stay-at-home mother. Known for her artistic talents and academic brilliance, Betsy graduated 5th in her high school class at Holland High School. Throughout her school years, she was active in extracurricular activities and excelled in English, art, and biology. As Betsy's high school years came to an end, she faced a tough decision about her future. While her parents encouraged her to pursue medicine, Betsy's interests also leaned towards literature and the arts. Ultimately, she decided to attend Hope College in the fall of 1965, which was known for its strong pre-med program. Standing at 5'8" with long brown hair touched with a hint of red, Betsy was a striking-looking young woman. While at Hope College, Betsy began to explore life beyond her studies. She went on several dates, though none developed into serious relationships. One encounter, however, took a darker turn when a man she dated either threatened her with a knife or brandished one during an argument. Betsy ended the relationship swiftly and no charges were filed. Betsy's dissatisfaction with Hope College began to grow. Yearning for a more dynamic environment and intrigued by the Peace Corps, Betsy transferred to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in 1967. At Michigan, Betsy decided to change her major from pre-med to English, drawn by her love of literature and poetry. She also met David Wright, a pre-med student who became a significant part of her life. By her senior year in 1968, David had transferred to Penn State Hershey Medical School. Betsy's dream of joining the Peace Corps remained strong, but David's reluctance to wait for her, stating, "I will not wait for you," influenced her decision to follow him to Penn State as a graduate student in English in the fall of 1969. Penn State offered a fresh start, but Betsy's workload was demanding. English 501, taught by the tough and respected professor Harrison Mezzaroli, was especially challenging. Betsy was diligent, often spending long hours in the Pattee library. She maintained her connection with David through letters and weekend visits to Hershey, but the academic pressures left little time for her socializing. On Thanksgiving 1969, Betsy traveled to Hershey to spend the holiday with David and his roommates. She returned to State College that evening to focus on her studies. Betsy and Sharon spent time chatting and playing cards before going to bed, unaware of the tragic events that would soon unfold. The day after Thanksgiving, November 28, 1969, the campus of Penn State University was eerily quiet. Most students had gone home for the holiday weekend, leaving the sprawling campus in a state of near silence. But for 22-year-old graduate student Betsy Aardsma, there was no time for rest. Deadlines loomed and her focus was on completing her work. Dressed in a sleeveless red dress layered over a white turtleneck, she left Atherton Hall that afternoon, a day of study ahead of her. Before heading to the library, Betsy met with Professor Nicholas Joukowsky during open office hours at the Burroughs Building. The discussion revolved around her previous paper for English 501, a challenging graduate course. Professor Joukowsky had taken an interest in one of her sources, prompting Betsy to promise she would retrieve it during her library visit. Around 4 p.m., Betsy entered Pattee Library through its main doors, passing the security checkpoint. She exchanged brief greetings with 2 classmates from English 501, Linda Marsa and Bob Steinberg, who were leaving the library together. Shortly afterward, in the card catalog room, Betsy accidentally bumped into another classmate, Marilee Erdely, who dropped her pencil in the exchange. Erdely apologized, and Betsy moved on. Betsy then met with Professor Harrison Mezzaroli, the lead instructor of English 501, in the basement of Pattee Library. The conversation centered on her second assignment, and by the meeting's end, Betsy's next steps became clear. She needed to delve into the stacks of Level 2 core, a central section of the library's basement where she had spent time before. The core's 7 near-identical levels were interconnected by a narrow, vintage elevator with a latching gate and antiquated push buttons. A basic staircase ran alongside it, winding tightly from top to bottom. Level 2 core was known for its claustrophobic layout. Rows upon rows of shelves obscured the view, creating an environment where one's presence was acutely felt by others but rarely seen because of the height of the stacks of books. The aisles were barely wide enough for one person, so visitors had to think ahead when attempting to navigate an aisle. Betsy seemed comfortable there. The east side of Level 2 core housed books on British world history, where Betsy made her way. Carol Manning, another student, was in the same section, working on her term paper. Manning recalled her pen running out of ink and borrowing one from Betsy, who smiled and told her to keep it. At that point, Betsy was surrounded by books, fully immersed in her work. Library employee Dean Brungard passed through the area around 4:30 p.m. He noticed Betsy in the aisle and also saw 2 men lingering a few rows away, speaking quietly. Witness accounts from this time became fragmented and inconsistent. Manning described one man with dark hair and darker skin, recalling how he had helped her retrieve a book from a high shelf. Brungard, however, noted 2 white males in the vicinity. It's important to note, neither Manning nor Brungard reported seeing the other, and their accounts fueled years of speculation about a possible 2-man scenario. Nearby, Marilee Erdely had settled herself just outside the eastern entrance of Level 2 core, seated at a desk in the stacks. She was approximately 20 feet from where Betsy worked, with a clear view of the eastern passage leading into the core. Further down, João Uafinda, an international student from Mozambique, browsed books in another section. Neither Erdely nor Uafinda reported seeing anyone enter the core during this time. Then, at approximately 4:45 p.m., everything changed. A loud crash echoed from the core, startling Erdely and Uafinda. Less than a minute later, a man emerged from the east passage. Erdely glanced up to see him walking briskly. She described him as approximately 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, with trimmed brown hair. He wore a lightweight jacket, slacks, a plaid button-down shirt, possibly with a tie. Uafinda's description matched Erdely's, though he also noted that the man's right hand remained hidden behind him. "Somebody better help that girl," the man said calmly as he passed Erdely. Both witnesses would later struggle to identify the man. The police remained uncertain whether there had been 1 man or 2, as Erdely's and Uafinda's description vary slightly. What is clear is that the man disappeared up the stairwell moments later, leaving a trail of questions in his wake. Uafinda felt concerned about this man and attempted to follow him up the stairs and out onto the campus. Meanwhile, Erdely entered the core cautiously. What she found was a scene of chaos. Books lay scattered across the aisle, and a metal bookshelf had been toppled. At the center of it all was Betsy, slightly moving and lying on her stomach. She wore her white turtleneck and red dress, a gold watch pendant around her neck. Dropping to her knees, Erdely leaned closer, her panic rising with each passing moment. Betsy weakly whispered something, but her words were too faint to understand. Erdely, interpreting the fallen books and the disarray around them as signs of a seizure, tried to comfort her. She noticed a small spot of blood on Betsy's sweater but failed to see the 1-inch slit hidden beneath the red dress. Remaining by Betsy's side, Erdely repeatedly called for help, her voice echoing through the otherwise quiet library. Over the next few minutes, at least 6 people walked past the aisle, but none stopped to assist the 2 young women. Erdely stayed until Patricia Bland, a librarian from the circulation desk, finally arrived. Bland knelt beside Betsy, joining Erdely in her efforts to help. Moments later, Murray Martin, the assistant head of the library, appeared. He unbuttoned the collar of Betsy's blouse and attempted to administer mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but his efforts were in vain. At 5:01 p.m., paramedics arrived, believing they were responding to a fainting incident. The phone call to the state police barracks was vague and uncertain. Quote, "At the library, a girl fainted. They don't know what's wrong with her." Initially, they believed they detected a faint pulse, offering a fleeting glimmer of hope. However, as they carefully turned Betsy over to place her on the cloth gurney, a librarian, Betsy Davis, noted drops of blood falling onto the floor. This subtle but ominous detail may have hinted at the true severity of the situation. The paramedics, guided by library staff, carried Betsy out through the east side of the core and into the larger elevator within the stacks. Erdely, clutching Betsy's purse tightly, followed them into the ambulance and sat in the passenger seat during the journey to Rittenauer Health Center. In the back of the ambulance, one paramedic desperately attempted chest compressions, unaware of the fatal wound hidden beneath her dress. Every moment was fraught with urgency, yet the grim reality of what had transpired was becoming increasingly evident. Betsy's life had slipped away before she even left the library. At the health center, whilst performing CPR, the doctor realized that the chest compressions were triggering an increasing amount of blood loss. He halted the chest compressions immediately and cut off the blouse. Only then did doctors discover the stab wound, a single precise blow that had pierced Betsy's pulmonary artery and filled her lungs with blood. This was the reason Betsy was unable to scream out, and perhaps more chillingly, the reason for the lack of blood where she lay. She was pronounced dead at 5:19 p.m. The aftermath was chaotic. Unaware that a homicide had taken place, library staff began cleaning the scene, reshelving books and mopping the floor. Critical evidence was destroyed in those early moments. Later, investigators found blood smears on a stairwell wall, suggesting the killer had either wiped the knife before fleeing or had injured himself with the knife and, in the process of fleeing, flicked his own blood along the wall. The autopsy of Betsy Aardsma was performed by Dr. Thomas Magnani at Belafonte Hospital in Belafonte, beginning at 11 p.m. November 28, 1969, and concluding at 4 a.m. the following morning. Dr. Magnani determined that Betsy had been killed by a single fatal stab wound. The blade had penetrated her breastbone with precision, piercing her heart and severing her pulmonary artery. This catastrophic injury led to extensive hemorrhaging into the chest cavity. Death had occurred swiftly, likely within minutes. Tragically, Betsy would have been unable to scream for help as her lungs filled with blood, effectively drowning her. Further examination revealed no evidence of assault. However, signs of petechial hemorrhaging were noted on her chest, and minor bruising and abrasions were observed around one of her ears, injuries likely sustained when she collapsed to the ground. Dr. Magnani concluded that Betsy's assailant had deliberately aimed for her heart, suggesting the act was premeditated. The angle and depth of the stab wound led him to believe the killer was a right-handed individual who had attacked her face-to-face. This chilling detail underscored the calculated nature of the crime and the brutal efficiency of the attack. When Trooper Mike Simmers arrived at Level 2 Core a few minutes later, the weight of the scene hit him immediately. Quote, "They told me the body had already been transported to the hospital on campus. It was all very strange. The area was being cleaned up. Students were milling about." He then rushed to Rittenauer Health Center where Betsy had been taken. There, Dr. Elmer Reed revealed the disturbing truth, showing Simmers the young woman's body and the fatal stab wound that caused her death. The student, identified as Betsy Aardsma, had not only succumbed to her injuries, but had been the victim of a brutal homicide. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Simmers immediately contacted the state police barracks located about 8 miles from campus and returned to the library with reinforcements. "We went back over to the library," Simmers said, "back to what we now know was a crime scene. But when they arrived, the area had been completely altered. Books had been reshelved, the floors mopped clean of any evidence. After the initial commotion, students had been allowed to walk through the area, and no one had been detained for questioning. What could have been a pristine crime scene was now irreparably compromised, leaving investigators to piece together fragments of a rapidly fading picture." Witness accounts varied widely. Richard Allen, an aerospace historian waiting for his son at the library, claimed to hear a normal conversation in the core moments before the crash. He also described seeing a man in, quote, "student dress," leaving the area whilst casually saying to him, quote, "There's a girl down there." However, in a second interview a week later, Allen claimed a blonde man in student dress, preppy with khakis, appeared from the core and said, "A girl in there needs help." The distinction is important because it means Allen may have been on the same level of the core as Betsy rather than a floor above. A librarian reported seeing a man with wavy blonde hair, maybe wearing glasses, maybe not, walk briskly from the card catalog room towards the main exit of the library. But more confusion ensues with these witness statements because a second-hand account from Patricia Bland at the circulation desk implied that a person in a winter coat emerged directly from the southern entrance of Level 3 Core into the lobby, telling her, quote, "A girl needs help." Bland couldn't remember whether the person was male or female. These fragmented details added to the confusion, leading to composite sketches that many felt were too generic to be useful. It's crucial to emphasize that Marilee Erdely never identified the man she encountered as someone from Betsy's English 501 class. This detail is particularly significant given how many of Betsy's classmates surrounded her that day. In 1969, the Pattee Library wasn't just a space for quiet study or research. It doubled as a social hub, making it common to see familiar faces between the stacks or at desks scattered throughout the building. "We had a couple of people who we believe could be the suspect," Trooper Simmers recalled, "but there was never enough evidence to make any arrests." Simmers explained that state police had brought in an expert equipped with an ultraviolet black light to search for bodily fluids in the area where Betsy was found. When the black light illuminated aisle 51, it revealed a startling scene. The space was covered in semen. However, most of the samples appeared to be days old or older, offering no direct link to Betsy's homicide. Simmers added that the stacks were known for being a clandestine spot often used to stash pornography or for secret homosexual rendezvous. Other evidence recovered included a spray of tiny blood droplets that investigators believed indicated someone had flicked their hands. Tests confirmed that the blood matched Betsy's type, but with the lack of DNA technology at the time, the evidence was insufficient to lead to any breakthroughs. Simmers worked tirelessly on the case for months, leveraging his knowledge of the campus to locate and bring in students for questioning. Between 30 and 40 state troopers were involved in the investigation, interviewing hundreds of students and chasing leads across the country, including in Pennsylvania and Betty's home state of Michigan. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the case remained frustratingly out of reach. Theory 1. Betsy was killed by someone she knew. This theory hinges on the personal nature of the attack and the circumstances surrounding the murder. Betsy, known for her casual style, wore a striking red dress and white turtleneck that day, a choice her friend Linda Marsa noted was unusual for her. This raises questions about whether Betsy had dressed up to meet someone special. Moreover, the narrow space between the bookshelves offers another clue. Why didn't Betsy scream when her attacker approached? Why were there no defensive wounds? These details suggest Betsy may have known and trusted her killer. Trooper Mike Simmers shared his own belief. "Personally, I think it was one of her fellow students who knew her. This was up close and personal. I just feel it," he said. Betsy's boyfriend, Dr. David Wright, was investigated but ultimately cleared by state police. His alibi placed him 100 miles away in Hershey, Pennsylvania, studying with friends at the time of her death. Theory 2. Betsy stumbled upon a gay sexual encounter. This theory emerged due to the evidence uncovered at the crime scene. Investigators, with the help of Penn State chemistry professor Mary Willard, used a black light to search for bodily fluids in the level 2 core stacks. What they found was shocking. The area was littered with semen. Trooper Kent Bernier noted, "It was everywhere. There was a lot of that going on in that area." Additionally, police discovered 20 to 30 adult-themed paperbacks hidden among the shelves. While some investigators speculated that Betsy may have accidentally witnessed a sexual encounter and was killed to ensure her silence, others, like retired trooper Roger Smith, dismissed the idea as improbable. Theory 3. A professor with a troubled past killed Betsy. One suspect who came under scrutiny was Robert G. Durgee, a teaching assistant from the University of Michigan who arrived at Penn State in the same semester as Betsy. Durgee, who had battled depression and had a history of self-harm, left Penn State abruptly the day before the murder, citing medical leave. 3 weeks after Betsy's death, Durgee died in a car crash near Lansing, Michigan, which his widow Martha Durgee described as likely a deliberate act. While investigators explored Durgee's possible connection to Betsy, both shared academic interests in English. They ultimately cleared him of involvement. Theory 4. Betsy was killed by drug dealers. This theory suggests that Betsy may have inadvertently stumbled upon a drug deal in progress in the library stacks. Alternatively, some speculated she might have been targeted because she was working as an undercover agent, though this was debunked by those close to her. Phyllis Wick Vandenberg, a friend of Betsy's, recalled being questioned by police about whether Betsy would have reported such an encounter. Vandenberg said, "I said no. She would have kept on a merry way and acted like she didn't see it." Investigators also followed a lead into a drug dealer from Philadelphia, but this individual was proven to be elsewhere at the time of the murder. Theory 5. Betsy was killed by a serial killer, possibly Ted Bundy. The possibility that Betsy was killed by a serial killer such as Ted Bundy has long intrigued investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Bundy, infamous for his cross-country killing spree, spent part of his youth in Philadelphia and briefly attended Temple University in 1969. His connection to Pennsylvania raises unsettling questions about whether he could have been involved in Betsy's death. According to a 20th anniversary article about Betsy's case, published in the Daily Collegian, Bundy was reportedly driving along Interstate 80 in the weeks leading up to the murder. While this timeline places him in the region, it remains speculative whether he was in State College on November 28, 1969. However, there was no definitive evidence that linked Bundy to Betsy. We start by mentioning that none of these men were ever charged in relation to Betsy Aardsma's homicide, and they are all innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. William Spencer was a 40-year-old sculptor who had recently relocated to Pennsylvania from Boston with his second wife just weeks before Betsy's murder. Known in his artistic endeavors, Spencer had previously co-founded the Cafe Lena in Saratoga Springs, New York in May 1960. Upon moving to Pennsylvania, he secured a position teaching sculpture at a local college while his wife pursued her PhD studies. Spencer first came to the attention of law enforcement as a potential suspect after allegedly confessing during a Christmas 1969 faculty gathering that he had said, "I killed that girl in the library." This claim prompted investigators to formally question him in 1970. During questioning, Spencer claimed that he had been acquainted with Betsy and that she had agreed to pose nude for his sculpting classes as a way to earn extra money. Furthermore, Spencer stated that he had been present in the Level 2 course stacks at the time of Betsy's murder and that he had seen her killer, describing the individual as wearing an overcoat. In an effort to aid the investigation, Spencer offered to create a bust of the person he claimed to have seen, which he later provided to the task force. However, Spencer's story quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Investigators discovered that he and his wife had only been living in Pennsylvania for a matter of weeks before the murder, leaving little time for him to have developed any meaningful acquaintance with Betsy. Moreover, his claims that she had posed as a nude model were dismissed outright. Those who knew Betsy described her as a modest, reserved young woman, making such claims implausible. Investigators also noted that all known nude models who had participated in Spencer's classes traveled from Philadelphia, further discrediting his assertions. Although Spencer's confession and subsequent statements initially raised suspicions, law enforcement ultimately dismissed him as a suspect. His claims, though sensational, lacked credibility and were unsupported by evidence or corroborating testimonies. Larry Mora, a fellow classmate of Betsy Aardsma, was another individual who briefly attracted the attention of investigators. Mora had become acquainted with Betsy in the weeks leading up to her death, even taking her out for coffee on one occasion. By all accounts, there was no animosity between the two, and Mora was ultimately cleared as a potential suspect. However, questions lingered around his polygraph test results, as it remains unclear whether he passed or failed. Mora's physical description diverged notably from the eyewitness accounts provided to law enforcement. He was blonde, of average height, and did not wear glasses, features markedly different from the individual seen by 3 witnesses fleeing the Level 2 course stacks immediately following Betsy's homicide. One of these witnesses had even been a classmate of Mora, further complicating the theory of his involvement. Still, Mora's behavior and interests left a lasting impression on those who knew him. Described as an eccentric character, he had been deeply fixated on Betsy, a fixation that reportedly persisted even after she rejected his advances. Known to carry a knife, Mora was a country boy and an avid hunter, skilled in basic anatomy. Such knowledge, investigators theorized, could have enabled him to execute the precise, singular wound that killed Betsy. Mora's involvement in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, or ROTC, also drew attention. Shortly after Betsy's homicide, he abruptly left Penn State to enlist in the Army, a move some saw as suspicious. Investigators speculated that a bayonet, standard military equipment, could have inflicted the fatal wound with ease. His subsequent association with the National Security Agency added another layer of intrigue, as his abrupt disappearance into the military world left many unanswered questions. Despite these suspicions, no concrete evidence ever tied Mora to Betsy's murder. While his quirks and unusual interests fueled speculation, the lack of corroborating proof ultimately left investigators unable to pursue him further. Richard Charles Hefner, a 25-year-old geology student at Penn State at the time of Betsy's murder, has been the subject of persistent speculation in the decades since her death. Both author Derek Sherwood and investigative journalist David DeCock, who have extensively studied the case, strongly believe that Hefner, and not Spencer or Mora, was responsible for the crime. Hefner was described as a well-respected but socially awkward individual who often went to extreme lengths to conceal his homosexuality, including attempting to form platonic relationships with women. In one such instance, in 1968, Hefner traveled from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts to declare his love for a woman he barely knew. When she rejected him and slammed the door in his face, Hefner returned to Penn State, where his eccentric behavior and bouts of explosive anger became well known. He was also suspected of stealing specimens from the university's rock and mineral collection. He also lived opposite Betsy in the Atherton Hall. At the time of Betsy's murder, Hefner lived across the courtyard from her dorm at Atherton Hall. He was often seen wearing khaki trousers and a sports coat, his short brown hair meticulously groomed. Hefner and Betsy had struck up a brief friendship in late October 1969, but Betsy soon ended the relationship, citing her commitment to David Wright. Hefner first came to the attention of investigators days after the murder when Betsy's roommate, Sharon Brandt, suggested police interview him. Brandt mentioned that Hefner had visited their apartment several times in the weeks leading up to the murder. In early December 1969, Hefner was questioned by investigators. He admitted to having socialized with Betsy but claimed their friendship ended quickly. According to Hefner, he was eating at a student union building when he first heard rumors of a homicide at the Pattee library. He described feeling physically ill upon learning that the victim was Betsy, whom he referred to as his former girlfriend. Hefner also claimed he never entered the library, as he primarily used Dyke Building for his geology research. Despite these claims, several details cast doubt on Hefner's account. The identikit image created by two witnesses bore a striking resemblance to him, and his study habits shifted dramatically after the homicide, with Hefner spending the next 2 years studying almost exclusively off-campus. In 1975, Hefner faced unrelated legal trouble when 2 young boys accused him of molestation. Although the trial resulted in a hung jury, the accusations tarnished his reputation, leading to vindictive lawsuits and an eventual expungement of the charges in 1981. Around this time, an acquaintance named Lauren Wright reported a suspicious encounter with Hefner on the evening of Betsy's murder. Wright recalled Hefner arriving at her house in a state of panic, exclaiming, "Have you heard? A girl I dated was murdered in the library." This account directly contradicted Hefner's statement to police about his whereabouts that night. Wright did not share this information with authorities until 1976, after a falling out with Hefner. Further suspicion arose when, in 2009, Hefner's nephew contacted Derek Sherwood to recount a heated argument between Hefner and his mother, Era, shortly after his 1975 arrest. During the argument, Era allegedly scolded her son, saying, "You killed that girl, and now you're killing me." The context of the conversation suggested that Hefner had confessed to his mother about Betsy's murder. Hefner's life ended in 2002 when he died alone in a hospital bathroom from a tear in his aorta, which caused blood to fill his lungs, a grim parallel to Betsy's own cause of death. Despite decades of speculation, no definitive evidence has ever linked Hefner to Betsy's murder. His erratic behavior and suspicious actions and the lingering doubts about his alibi leave him as one of the most enigmatic figures in the unsolved case of Betsy Aardsma. Betsy's funeral was held on December 3, 1969 at Trinity Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan. Her boyfriend, David Wright, devastated by her murder, placed a single rose in her hand as she lay in her coffin. For those who knew Betsy, her death was an unimaginable loss. A young woman with so much potential, silenced in a place she should have been safe. More than 5 decades later, the murder of Betsy Aardsma remains unsolved. The questions linger: who killed her, and why? The silence of the library stacks where she died has returned, but the memory of that dark day continues to haunt those who remember her story. Betsy's case stands as a chilling reminder that even the safest spaces can harbor unimaginable darkness. So what do you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts and theories. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you, and see you next time.